Welcome to the Max Parts and Bills and Materials training session. I'm your Exact Max Americas trainer, Vince Stefanetti. In this training session, we're going to learn about Max part and BOM methods, how to relate your parts to Max part definitions, how to add parts in Max, how to add, change, and delete bills and materials, how to do a phase in and phase out using effectivity date logic, how to do mass changes and mass deletions, how to add part and BOM notes, reference designators, and how to do a where used and other useful reports. As well, we're going to establish additional part and BOM functionality in the system so you can see how this all works. Well, it may be a good idea to start with what a bill of materials actually is. Well, it's a list of all raw materials, parts, intermediates, and subassemblies with their quantities and descriptions required to construct, overhaul, or repair something. Now, how does this relate to Max? Well, Max is essentially a part ID driven system. The part ID is common to nearly every table in Max. Part definitions and BOM configurations are of the utmost importance when you're starting to implement the system. They need to be as close to 100% correct so that everything else in the system works properly. Now, what do you need to get started? Well, you're going to need all of your parts. That includes descriptions and any other pertinent data that you already have. You're going to need bill of materials information, your product structures, the quantities of each component, and their function, i.e. their manufactured parts or purchased parts. Also, you're going to have to take a look at what is the desired method of getting these parts into the system. Max allows you to do manual entry, adding parts one by one, but it also allows you to do data loads, which we'll go over too. Now, what are the kinds of things you're going to need to know? Well, you're going to need to know some specifics about Max. You're going to need to know about part type codes and other part-specific information. You're going to need to know where to go to get that information into the system. And you're going to need to know and be very familiar with your own manufacturing process so you can map these things together. Okay, our first bit of information here is defining what a part type code actually is. Now, in Max, the part type code determines the function of the part system-wide. An assembly or intermediate should be treated differently than, say, a purchase part. Now, Max programs act upon this part type code so as to perform specific functions, to create purchase orders, build orders, to suggest reorder on a reorder point basis, order safety stock, and so on. Now, the part type codes in Max are defined by a letter, which we'll show you shortly, and an icon. And it's good to know as well that it's not good to change part type codes once they're established in the system, because that can affect MRP results. Now, here's a list of the various part type codes in Max. An A part type is a normal manufactured part. That's represented by the little hammer. A B, normal purchase part, is designated by the little $ and change. All the different part type codes here have their associated icons and a description. The main ones you're going to need to know about are master schedule parts, M part types, A, normal manufactured, and B, normal purchased. The others have specific functions, and if you need to use those, you need to get them defined and make sure you understand how they function in the system. But in the main, you're going to be using A's, B's, and M's. Okay, now to get started, the main things you're going to need to do are enter parts, enter your bills of materials, and run reports and review your information. There's a lot of specific information in configuration fields for parts. We're going to go over those, and you're going to see how this works in Max. If you have any questions after this, you could always refer to the documentation because each and every field is very clearly defined. Okay, let's log into the system. Double-click your Max icon on your desktop. Log into the system. Your default username and password in Max is manager all capitals and password all capitals. Once you've logged in, you'll be presented with the System Manager. To get to the Bills of Materials module, click the Engineering tab, and then click Bills of Materials. Alright, now the first thing we're going to look at is Part Master. This is a series of tabs with departmental information for each one. The Master tab has the most basic information regarding your part. And you can actually enter a part simply by entering the part ID here, specifying a part type code, and entering a primary location. Now you can actually make the primary location required by going to Options and Preferences and checking this box here. If you do not want to do that because you have not set up your stock IDs yet, then you can uncheck that and add parts simply by typing in a part ID, selecting your part type code, and clicking Add. We'll add a manufactured part here just to demonstrate, and click Add. Now if we have this option checked, if we try to add a new part here, it'll give us a warning telling us that we need to add that. We have some in the demonstration system here, so we'll select one, and then we can add that one. Okay, so let's look at some important fields in the Master tab. Of course, there's part ID and part type code, and as we went over earlier, part type code is very important to the operations in the system. So make sure you select the correct part type code when you're adding parts, enter in your descriptions, and then enter in any essential information that you have here in the screen. Now there are some important fields here that have other effects within the system. For instance, your unit of measure. Now this is a 2-character descriptor describing your unit of measure. You could put in each, or pounds, or whatever your unit of measure happens to be that you inventory parts as. Now that's your bill of material unit of measure. Now there's a cost unit of measure, and there's also a sales unit of measure. When you look at the sales order processing training session, the sales conversion factor has gone over there. In purchasing, we go over the cost unit of measure. But just to identify what this is right now, Max will convert purchase unit of measures into bill of materials unit of measure if you actually specify the cost conversion factor. Now what this does is it takes the material cost of the purchase part and converts it into bill of materials units. Okay, so if you say you buy in packets of 1, but then you stock it by 12, well, your conversion factor would have to be 12 because you buy in a single unit and then you stock in 12. This goes from pounds to ounces, from cases to individual units, and so on. So you want to specify your bill of materials unit of measure here. This is what you stock it as. Okay, primary location, we went over that and showed you that can be either required or not. You have your class code. If you want to define an ABC classification, then you can put in the code here for the part. The commodity code is also a very important field. The reason for that is that inquiries, reports, and the browsers in Max often use the commodity code. So your commodity code is going to be a categorization of product, and you can enter that in here for each individual part, and that'll make it much easier for you to search on things in the system. So come up with a scheme of commodity code for your entire part set and make sure that you assign the proper commodity code here so it'll be easier for you to do those searches. Now, each one of the yellow highlighted fields is what's called a browsable field. So if you double click on it, you get another screen to browse that particular table. For part ID, we're looking at the Part Master browser. We can search all parts. Now we can email that, we can print that, we can copy it. So if you want to do that, you can. You can erase the information or stop the browser, or you can search after you enter in something here. Now your search can be by part ID, or any of these items here. You can see commodity code is there. But you can do it by planner ID or class code or buyer as well, whichever suits you to search for your part. If you click on the primary stock ID, you're getting at the Stock Master browser, which will show you all your stock locations. We have several in the training database here, so you can see them, as well for buyers. The thing to know is that any yellow highlighted field is a browsable field and allows you to drill down into the detail of that particular table. Okay, our next one is the Engineering tab. Now this tab has information specific for engineering. So you can enter in a part ID. It contains the unit of measure, the yield. As mentioned earlier, you want to try to keep this at 100% at the onset unless you have clearly defined yield percentages to apply. Your revision level and your engineering status. The engineering status is important because this specifies whether the part is active or not. The default is 2, which means that it's active. If you want to deactivate a part or obsolete it, select status 5. You can put in the date obsoleted here. Select the date. Click OK. Now another feature that we have here is the drawing file name and the ability to show pictures. We'll select one here for demonstration. Click Show, and it gives us the picture. Now if we want to open that, Windows Association will activate the application that's associated with the .jpg file, which I selected here. Now another aspect of this is you could specify a AutoCAD file or other types of file, and as long as they're associated in Windows, when you click Open, it'll fire up that application. Now another feature that's available is the Associate function. Right-clicking on any yellow highlighted field enables you to associate documents or whatever file you like to this particular part ID. We've selected many here. Let's look at one of them. But once you have it in there, if you double-click that, it'll open the application. Okay, our next tab is the Planner tab. So you can use this to add parts, but this has specific information to configure MRP and shop floor control. You have your order quantities. You can specify minimum, maximum, or multiple order quantities. That means MRP will plan according to these quantities. You could specify an average order quantity as well. You specify manufacturing lead times and purchasing lead times in this tab. You also specify your order policy. This is the policy by which MRP will actually create orders. Default is lot for lot. This means that MRP will create at most one planned order per day. Other details here, such as firm plan code and manufacturer's part control and a few other things here, should be reviewed in the documentation to make sure you know these definitions so that you can configure appropriately. Our next tab is the Inventory tab. As you can see, you specify here your cycle count policy. That's your cycle count code, which defines how often you're going to do the cycle count, your class code, your tolerance levels, and it'll also display here how many counts have been done year to date, how many have been out of tolerance, and the last time that the cycle count was performed. Configuring these things here allows you to use reports and inventory control to print your cycle count worksheets and so on. Also, if the tolerances are set here, when you do cycle counts in the system, it will give you warnings telling you that you're out of tolerance when you try to cycle count. Okay, some other things of importance here are reorder point and reorder quantities, safety stock levels, allowable excess receipt percentages, and whether the part's under lot and serial control. Also, you'll get a warning when a part is received on a purchase order if the inspection required checkbox is checked. Now, the accounting tab is the screen that's used to change or review costing information for a part. You can also enter new parts here. Now, to properly use this screen, you must first set up system-wide costing information using the costing module. This information includes the default labor rate and material and labor burden rates. Max uses the information to enter into this screen to determine costs for a given part before using the Recalculate Cost Rollups program. That's the program that rolls costs from the very bottom levels all the way up to the top. For a purchase part, which is manually costed, the only required entry is the material cost for that part. If you change the material burden percent or other cost information, you need to click the Recalc button seen here to recalculate the cost per unit. Then you can choose whether to update the file or not. For a manufactured part, which is automatically costed, the only required entry is the labor hours per unit for that part. Some fields, such as the cumulative cost fields, are display only. If you want to find these definitions for these different fields here, just refer to the documentation or the glossaries in the manuals. Now, another item of note here is the cost conversion factor. This is an important field because this allows you to convert purchase units into bill of materials or inventory units. You need to specify the conversion factor here in order to convert them by cost and quantity from purchase to inventory or bill of materials units. When you specify the purchase cost, you need to enter in actually what the purchase cost is. This is not the inventory cost or the bill of material cost. This is what you buy it in. Now, the Bill of Materials tab is used to establish parent and component relationships. Now, before you can do this, you have to make sure that you have the parent and component identifiers added to the system as part IDs. That would have been done in the Master tab or any of the tabs that allow you to add a part. Now, the effective date field displayed on the BOM tab here displays the date a parent-component relationship is included within a product structure. A product structure relationship remains valid until it is replaced by another product structure relationship with a later date for the same parent-component combination. An effective date for a specific relationship cannot be changed. Now, parts entered in the Master tab display a blank effective date by default. This is a, quote, a null date, which is the earliest valid date in the system. Assigning future effective dates allows engineering to change a product structure in a time-phased manner. MRP determines requirements for the correct parts by comparing effective dates for those parts with the due date of an order. New records with later effective dates for the same part can be used to distinguish changes such as scrap factor, lead time offset, quantity per assembly, quantity code, engineering change number, alternate part, change in a part in the structure. Let's look at how to phase in and phase out a component part. Let's first add 3 parts. That's the top level part. And then our next one, we'll just make X1. And X2. Now brand X needs to be a normal manufactured part. We'll update that. Now, the way that we phase in and phase out is by taking the quantity per and the effective date of one of the components and making that 0, and then bringing in the other part on the very same date with a quantity per. I'll show you how that's done here. So here we have brand X at the top, and here we have brand X 1. We'll give it a effective date at the beginning of November here, and add that. And then we'll take 2. And this is going to be a future effective date. We'll make that the 8th. Okay. So now we have brand X1 was effective on the 1st. We'll select that here. Now we're going to make this phase out brand X1 on the 8th. So we'll add a new effective date for brand X1. We'll make that the 8th, and its quantity per is going to be 0. And we put in brand X2 effective on the 8th with a quantity per of 1. So when the system goes through and looks at this, it's going to see those 3 effective dates. The original effective date, which could have been blank for brand X1, we put it on the 1st. And then we have another effective date for brand X1 on the 8th. Brand X2 becomes effective on the 8th and has a quantity per, but brand X1 on the 8th had a quantity per of 0. So to iterate this one more time, basically what you do is you take a component and you give it a quantity per of 0 on the date that the new part becomes effective, and the new part has that very same date. Now to look over a couple other things in the Bill of Materials tab here, you have Bill of Materials notes. So these are notes specific to this parent and component relationship, and you can add them in here. These would be your reference designators and so on. So you could add BOM notes here. And these can print on shop paperwork and some other reports. Our next tab is the Alternate Process tab. MAX contains the ability to specify alternate bills of materials and alternate routings for parts. Now you have to add your parent part in the system, but once you have it in, you can specify alternate codes for parts. We can enter in a few here. Now this is a 30-character field, so you can put in a much longer description than a simple O1 or O2. But I'm doing a couple here just to show you how this works. Now, once you've specified your alternate codes, you can then go into Bill of Materials tab, or even in the Visual Bill of Materials, and specify the current alternate code and edit them here. So you can maintain all your alternate codes for your alternate bills of materials, and this adds another dimension to the parent component effective date logic. So you could have a whole series of effective dates or phase in and phase out components using a particular alternate as well. So it's a whole other dimension to adding bills of materials for parts, and you can build separate BOMs using separate alternate codes. Now once you've entered in that information for the alternates, you want to make sure that you specify what your current alternate is. We'll make O1 the alternate here. In the training session in shop floor control, we're going to be going over alternate routings and show you that. But you specify your codes here and their descriptions, enter in your current alternate BOM or alternate routing, or if you're using the default, then you can use this and leave it blank. Okay, the only other tab remaining here is Manufacturer's Part Control, which is gone over in more detail in the purchasing training session. You can specify whether the part's under manufacturer's part number control here, and specify the manufacturer's part number if you want. You have a whole other dimension here of being able to enter in manufacturer's part numbers for any given part. You simply add the part ID that you want to put under MPN control. Make sure that you select the checkbox there to put it under control, and you'll see as soon as you click the checkbox, that'll activate the area underneath the part identifier. So you can have multiple manufacturer's part numbers per part ID. Okay, let's look at the visual bill of materials. Click on the icon or select it from the activity menu, and we can maximize it here. Okay, let's do a quick tour of the visual BOM. So you have three panes here. This main pane over here on the left is the BOM builder pane. You can put product structures and bills of materials in that pane by double right clicking on the part list here. If you double click the left mouse button, it puts the information down in the product structure pane. You can check these boxes here to include detail or to specify your alternate bill of materials. Alright, some other things to look at here are the button here to save bills of materials. The one represents viewing a single level explosion of a product structure, and the plus means show me the entire structure, a multi-level explosion. Likewise on this side, the one gives you single level, the plus gives you multi-level, and you can go back to single level. If you want to do an implosion of a component, say we want to do an implosion of part number 13,000 here, we can select 13,000 from the part list, throw it in the pane by double left mouse click, click the implosion, and do a multi-level explosion of that. It's only down one level, so it doesn't go any further levels, but there you can see you can do an implosion. We'll go back to our main part here. Double left click, multi-level explosion. Now you have very powerful editing capabilities with the visual BOM. We're going to go back to a single level explosion of this part. We'll click the minus here to fold the structure back up to a single level. And we're going to look at a full parts list on this side. Now if you change the quantity per on a structure, you'll see that the changed part displays blue bars on the left hand side. Okay, now as well you have the ability to show all dates or even zero quantity, so you can see phase in, phase out type components. Specifying this date here is the add with date. So any parts that you go through and drag and drop onto the structure, which we'll show you shortly here, would be added with this date. Now under options you have preferences for the visual BOM. Add with date, which means it'll add using the date specified here. And also, if you want to copy bill of materials notes when you're adding structures or moving structures around. We'll keep those both checked for right now. Okay, so let's go through and see how we can drag and drop components and use the powerful functionality here that we have in the visual bill of materials. So we'll blank that out and search all parts. But say we want to look at just purchase parts, because we're going to add some of those. So we'll use part type B. Search on that, it'll give us all our buy parts. You can see by the little icon over here on the left. Now, the visual BOM allows you to select individual parts or multiple parts, or even if you hold down the shift key, you could select a whole series of parts. Now say we wanted to take all these and put them on this one structure here. Not a real life example, but if you hold down your left shift key, right click your mouse button, you drag it over, you can see that get the circle with the line through it specifying that you can't do anything with it at that part of the pane. But when we move over the parent part and we release our right mouse button, it places all those components on this structure. Now they're displayed in red because this has not been saved yet, meaning that the editing is still active here. You could select one, hit your delete key, and delete that off the structure. You can select another component and delete that if you'd like to. Once you've finished editing your structure, go ahead and hit the S button and save that structure. And there we go. Alright, now not only can you add components from the list here, but say you have a new parent part identifier at this level. Now the way that you would do this is you would enter in your new master scheduled or top level part in the part master tabs, and then you would go into the visual bill of material and pull that part up like we've done here. Next, you would select the parts from the earlier structure or earlier computer max here. You hold down your left shift key, hold down the right mouse button, and then drag it over and place all those components over here. Now additionally, while we're on the subject of bill of materials manipulation, from your batch menu you have two other options here, mass change and mass delete. Now to use mass change, select it from the batch menu. You put in your from part ID and your to part ID. If you like, you could specify an ECN number. Now you have to be very careful when using this functionality. As you can see there's an effective date specification in the dialog box here. It says effective date greater than or equal to the specified date. Now if you have blank dates in the system and you're not using effective dates, then it will select everything. If you specify one here and you're using effective date logic, you have to be very careful how you do this to make sure that you look and see that there are no earlier parts with effective dates that could potentially become active as a result of the change that you're making here. So just be sure that you review your structures and make sure that making a mass change here won't suddenly enable other parts in the product structure and cause planning and other havoc in the system. The mass delete functionality under batch allows you to specify a part ID either as a parent or a component and do a mass delete of those structures. The date specified here is the date less than your specified date. Each of these has an output file that you can review after you've completed the process. It's a good idea to do that just to make sure the program did what you wanted it to. Okay, another very important function under batch is recalculate low-level codes. Whenever you edit structures or bills of materials, it's very important that you go through and run recalculate low-level codes. What this does is it reviews all the structures in the database and makes sure that it identifies the lowest low-level code of this part in any given structure. If this is not done and the low-level codes are incorrect, the system will not know where the part is in the structure, and this can create a lot of trouble in various parts of the system, MRP and other planning type processes. Now there's one other item under batch, and that's the copy notes function. You have the ability to copy part master notes, part notes, or bill of materials notes from structure to structure or part to part. Simply add your from part and your to part. You can append, replace, or not update at all, or you can delete notes. For bill of materials, select that. You could specify the parent, component, from, to, and even the alternate code. You could specify the effective dates that you want to, and you can also specify to append, replace, or not to update at all, and you can specify to delete the from notes if you wish. Now, after you've entered parts and manipulated your structures, you're going to want to review your work. That can be done by running the reports in the Bills of Materials module. Click Report. You can do a parts list, do a bill of materials report, and even do a costed bill of materials report. The parts list simply lists out parts with some specific information. You can include your description too, and you can include your part notes. Simply put in your start and end with part ID, and you have sort sequences by part type code, class code, planner ID, and commodity code, and you can specify your range by part ID or any of the other factors here. The next report is your bill of materials report. You could select all part IDs, arrange or individual parts, produce a single or multi-level explosion, and have an output of explosion or implosion. There's several different options here. Just make your selection, specify your effective date, and then run your report. The next one is the cost of bill of materials report, which is a bill of materials that shows all costs. You can specify your cost set and some other configuration options right here, run your report, and review the output. Okay, well that concludes our training session on parts and bills of materials in MAX. To summarize really quickly here, what we've done is we've gone through and looked at all the tabs in the part master. This is where you enter in all your part specific information, enter in your part type code, engineering data, planner data for MRP, inventory data, which includes specifying your cycle count policy and other qualifiers. We went over the cost conversion factor and entering cost in the accounting tab, and as well entering individual parent component relationships in the bill of materials tab. We also covered how you can use alternate BOM and alternate routing by specifying your alternate codes in the alternate process tab. As well, we reviewed the visual bill of materials and showed you how easy it was to drag and drop and copy structures and manipulate your bills of materials using the visual BOM. As well, we went over the various reports that we have in MAX to review your work. Keep in mind that you have a whole bunch of additional resources to help you with MAX. First, you have all the documentation that's available through the System Manager by clicking the links under each module to access the module-specific documentation. As well, you have a resource of documents on your server installation in the doc folder that you can use. These will assist you with the database reference and many other things. Go take a look at those. They're available. You should read up on the specifics that you need to assist with your implementation. As well, if you don't have access to the customer portal, contact your customer advocates so you can get a username and password. The portal contains a knowledge base and a lot of other documents that are very useful to you in your implementing system. Thanks for attending, and we hope to see you for our next training session.